My son-in-law told me I would end up with nothing after my daughter's death, but he had no idea what was coming at the will reading. Robert's words hung in the air like poison. You should prepare yourself for a difficult future, Helen, because I've ensured you receive absolutely nothing. The lawyer's office felt suddenly cold, the expensive furnishings offering no comfort. 2 hours later, when the attorney revealed my actual inheritance, Robert collapsed so dramatically he nearly took a decorative lamp with him. Where are you watching from today? Share your location in the comments below, and if this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe to Winds of Thought. But let me explain how a 68-year-old grandmother went from facing homelessness to watching her son-in-law's world shatter in a legal office. This story begins 8 months ago when my beautiful daughter Elizabeth lost her courageous fight against breast cancer. At just 41, she left behind 2 incredible children, and a gaping hole in our family that nothing could fill. I had sold my own home to help cover her medical expenses, moved in with her family, and spent every precious moment by her bedside, watching my vibrant child fade away. Robert played the part of the devoted husband perfectly throughout Elizabeth's illness. He posted touching tributes online, held her hand during treatments, and offered just the right words of comfort when hope grew thin. I should have recognized it as performance, but grief has a way of clouding your judgment. It makes you miss the warning signs that someone is already counting their future inheritance. Grief reveals true character, some rise with compassion, others calculate their gain. The funeral was exactly as Elizabeth would have wanted, filled with her favorite music, sunflowers everywhere, and heartfelt stories that celebrated her brilliant but too brief life. Robert delivered a moving eulogy about their eternal bond, and how he would cherish her memory forever. I sat between my grandchildren, Sophia and Ben, holding their hands as we said our final goodbyes to the woman we all adored. 3 weeks later, Robert knocked on my bedroom door early one morning. I assumed he needed help with breakfast, or wanted to discuss Elizabeth's belongings. Instead, he stood there holding a cardboard box with an expression so cold it chilled me to my core. Helen, he began, and I immediately noticed he'd dropped the affectionate mom he'd used for 15 years. You need to pack your things. The children and I require space to properly grieve, and having you here is preventing us from moving forward. I stared at him, certain I must have misunderstood. I'm sorry, what did you say? I need you to leave today. I've already spoken with Sophia and Ben, and they understand this is necessary for our family's healing. The words struck me with physical force. I had given up my home, my financial security, my entire life to care for Elizabeth and support her family. Now I had nowhere to go, no safety net, because family was supposed to be that net. Robert, I think the grief is affecting your judgment. Perhaps we should discuss this when you've had more time to process everything. His laugh was sharp and humorless. My judgment has never been clearer. Elizabeth is gone, and frankly, I don't need a constant reminder of her presence in my home. You look too much like her. It's unsettling. In that moment, I understood that my daughter had married a man without conscience. No one who truly loved their wife would say something so cruel to her grieving mother. No decent person would discard a family member who had sacrificed everything. What about Sophia and Ben? They just lost their mother. They need their grandmother's stability. They need normalcy, not an elderly woman weeping in hallways and burning meals because she's too distraught to function properly. I packed my life into 30 minutes. 48 years of memories, photographs, keepsakes from my marriage to Elizabeth's father, everything that mattered reduced to 3 suitcases and 2 boxes. Robert stood in the doorway watching, checking his watch, clearly impatient for my departure. The children were at school. I would have waited to say goodbye, but Robert made it clear I wasn't welcome to linger. As I loaded my car, I glimpsed Robert through the kitchen window already on the phone, likely telling whoever would listen how difficult I had been, how he'd had no choice but to ask me to leave. That was 7 months ago. 7 months living in a cramped studio apartment behind Mr. Chen's grocery store, surviving on Social Security, and the kindness of a landlord who charged me reduced rent out of pity. 7 months of simple meals and wondering how I had become disposable to my own family. The hardest part wasn't the financial strain, or the limited space. It was the silence from my grandchildren. Sophia and Ben had been the center of my universe since their births. I had babysat them weekly, taught Sophia to garden, helped Ben with his math homework. After Robert sent me away, they stopped responding to my calls. Their phones went directly to voicemail. My messages went unanswered. I drove past their school once, hoping for a glimpse to reassure myself they were well. Sophia spotted me across the parking lot and quickly turned away, pulling Ben toward the building entrance. The rejection cut deeper than Robert's cruelty because I knew it didn't originate with them. But here's what I discovered about being knocked down in your late 60s. You either remain on the ground, or you find the strength to rise again. And Helen McCarthy didn't raise a quitter. She raised a fighter. Then came the call about Elizabeth's will reading. I should have suspected something unusual when Mr. Davidson, Elizabeth's attorney, insisted on waiting 8 months after the funeral to read the will. Most estates settle within weeks, but he kept postponing, citing complex legal issues that needed resolution. Robert had grown increasingly frustrated with the delays, calling the law office repeatedly, demanding access to Elizabeth's assets. The night before the reading, I sat in my small apartment deciding what to wear. I owned exactly 2 presentable outfits, neither suitable for watching my son-in-law inherit everything my daughter had owned. I chose my gray dress, the one I'd worn to Elizabeth's college graduation, and my grandmother's silver bracelet. I arrived at Davidson Legal precisely at 2 p.m., 15 minutes early because that's how I was raised. The office radiated old-money elegance that made visitors instinctively lower their voices. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that probably cost more than my annual food budget, legal volumes arranged more for decoration than reference. Robert was already there, sitting in the waiting area, as if he owned the building. He'd brought an expensive briefcase, which seemed excessive since he wasn't inheriting business documents. When he noticed me, his expression shifted to the artificial concern he'd perfected during Elizabeth's illness. "Helen," he said, standing with theatrical solicitude. "How are you managing? You've lost weight." I wanted to tell him people tend to slim down when they're eating soup for dinner most nights, but instead I simply smiled. "I'm managing, Robert. How are Sophia and Ben?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They're adjusting. It's been challenging, but we're healing together as a family. As a family without me." The message was unmistakable. Mr. Davidson emerged from his office exactly at 2. A distinguished man in his 60s with intelligent eyes, and an expression I couldn't decipher. "Mrs. McCarthy, Mr. Henderson, thank you for coming. Please join me inside." His office was even more impressive than the reception area. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city skyline, and his desk was large enough to host a small conference. He gestured toward chairs facing his desk, Robert immediately claiming the one with the best view. "Before we begin," Mr. Davidson said, settling behind his desk, "I want to express my sincere condolences on Elizabeth's passing. She was an extraordinary woman, and her absence is deeply felt by all who knew her." Robert nodded solemnly. I simply gripped my handbag tighter, trying not to recall my daughter's final words to me in the hospital: "Watch over my babies, Mom. Make sure they remember how much I loved them." Some promises become impossible when the other parent systematically excludes you. "Now then," Mr. Davidson continued, opening a substantial folder. "Elizabeth's will is relatively straightforward, but contains specific instructions she wanted followed. Robert, as her husband, you are named primary beneficiary of the family home, her vehicle, and her personal checking accounts." Robert leaned forward, extracting a pen from his briefcase, as if preparing to sign important documents. "What about the life insurance policy?" "That will be addressed momentarily." Elizabeth also left specific items to her children. Sophia is to receive her grandmother's porcelain collection and her jewelry when she turns 18. Ben receives her library and the guitar. I smiled at that. Elizabeth had been an avid reader like her father, and she'd taught Ben to play guitar starting when he was 6. These bequests demonstrated how well she understood her children, what would matter to them as they matured. "And for you, Mrs. McCarthy," Mr. Davidson said, looking directly at me. Elizabeth left her photograph albums, her recipe collection, and a personal letter. My throat tightened with emotions I'd suppressed for 8 months. Robert shifted impatiently. "That's very touching," he said. "But could we discuss the financial assets? The life insurance, her retirement accounts, any investments?" Mr. Davidson's expression remained neutral. "Of course." Elizabeth had a $175,000 life insurance policy through her employer. However, there was a beneficiary change executed 7 weeks before her passing. Robert's pen stopped moving. "A change? What kind of change?" "The policy was originally payable to you as spouse. However, Elizabeth amended the beneficiary to her children, with funds to be held in trust until Sophia turns 24 and Ben turns 22. The room temperature seemed to drop significantly. Robert's face progressed from pale to flushed to an interesting mauve shade I'd never seen outside a sunset. "That's impossible," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Elizabeth never mentioned changing anything. She would have discussed that with me." "I have the signed documentation here," Mr. Davidson said calmly. Elizabeth was quite specific about her wishes regarding her children's financial security. I watched Robert's hands tremble as he processed this information. $175,000 vanished. Money he'd likely already mentally spent, perhaps had even begun spending in reality. "This makes no sense," he said, standing abruptly. Elizabeth was heavily medicated toward the end. She wasn't thinking clearly. "This needs to be contested." Mr. Davidson remained seated, unperturbed by Robert's outburst. "I can assure you Elizabeth was completely lucid when she made this change. In fact, she specifically anticipated there might be questions, which is why she asked me to document her mental state. I have video testimony if required." Video testimony. My heart swelled with pride for my daughter. Even dying, even weakened and fighting for every breath, she had been clear-minded enough to protect her children from a man she must have finally recognized. Robert sat down heavily, his dreams of easy wealth crumbling. But I could see the calculations continuing behind his eyes. He wasn't finished fighting. "Fine," he said finally. "The insurance goes to the children. I can accept that. But everything else comes to me as surviving spouse." "Correct," Mr. Davidson confirmed. "The house, vehicle, and checking accounts are yours." Robert's smile returned, cold and calculating. "Good, because I've already made arrangements to sell the house. The children and I are relocating to Arizona for a fresh start, and I want this chapter closed." Sell the house. The home where Elizabeth had brought her newborns from the hospital, where she'd taught them to ride bicycles in the driveway, where every room held memories of the family we'd been before cancer stole our happiness. He intended to erase it all for money. "That concludes Elizabeth's will," Mr. Davidson said, but made Northwest move to close the folder. "However, there is one additional matter we need to discuss." Robert was already standing, probably planning his next mortgage payment or vacation. "Additional matter?" "Yes. You see, there's been another death in the family recently, one that affects both of you." I felt a premonitory chill. The only relative who'd been unwell recently was my Aunt Clara, my mother's sister, who'd been in assisted living in Oregon for years. I hadn't heard from her in months, but then I'd been somewhat occupied watching my daughter die and becoming homeless. "What death?" Robert asked impatiently. Mr. Davidson looked directly at me. "Mrs. McCarthy, I regret to inform you that your Aunt Clara passed away 4 weeks ago. Her executor contacted our firm because you're named as her sole beneficiary." The world seemed to tilt. Aunt Clara had been wealthy. Everyone knew that. But she'd never married, never had children, and I'd always assumed her estate would go to charity. We'd exchanged birthday cards for decades, but I couldn't recall our last actual conversation. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "Clara barely knew me. According to her will, she'd been following your life from a distance for years. She knew about Elizabeth's illness, your financial sacrifices, your recent living situation, about Robert asking you to leave." Heat flooded my cheeks with embarrassment, but Mr. Davidson's tone was factual, not pitying. Robert had frozen in place, his briefcase forgotten. "How much money are we discussing here?" Mr. Davidson opened a second, even thicker folder. Clara Winston owned substantial real estate holdings, stocks, bonds, and other investments. The total estate, after taxes and fees, amounts to approximately $2.6 million. The silence in the room was absolute. I couldn't breathe. $2.6 million, enough to purchase 15 homes like the one Robert planned to sell, enough to secure my future, and my grandchildren's educations with plenty remaining to assist other families facing medical financial crises. Robert's face had progressed from mauve to ashen. "That money should be part of Elizabeth's estate," he said desperately. "Family inheritance should follow marital lines." "I'm afraid inheritance law doesn't operate that way," Mr. Davidson said with what might have been the slightest hint of satisfaction. Clara Winston left her assets specifically to Helen McCarthy, with very detailed instructions explaining why. He handed me an envelope bearing my name in the familiar spidery handwriting from decades of birthday cards. Inside was a single sheet covered in the same careful script. My dear Helen, it read. By the time you read this, I'll be gone and you'll be wondering why a distant relative you barely knew left you a fortune. The truth is, I've been observing your life for years through Elizabeth's holiday letters and social media posts. I witnessed how you loved your family, how you sacrificed for them, how you gave up everything to care for your daughter in her final months. I also know that Robert Henderson asked you to leave your home after Elizabeth's funeral, leaving you with nothing but sorrow and a broken spirit. Consider this resources my method of balancing the scales. Use them wisely. Support those children when they're mature enough to understand who genuinely cares for them. And remember that occasionally the cosmos possesses a sense of justice. You've earned every dollar of this inheritance through your compassion, your resilience, and your dignity in confronting cruelty. Now go demonstrate to that worthless son-in-law what occurs when you mistreat a McCarthy woman. Affectionately, Aunt Clara. When I finished reading, tears streamed down my face. Robert stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. Because suddenly, the elderly woman he'd discarded as worthless held all the power. Robert's transformation from arrogantly confident to desperately strategic happened faster than a lightning strike. Before I could fully process Aunt Clara's letter, he was sliding his chair closer to mine, his voice adopting the honeyed tone I remembered from Elizabeth's early dating years. Helen, this is wonderful news, he said, reaching to pat my hand as if we were dear friends. Elizabeth would be so relieved knowing her mother is financially secure. This lifts such a burden from all our shoulders. I withdrew my hand and carefully folded Aunt Clara's letter. 20 minutes earlier, this man had been calculating how quickly he could cash Elizabeth's life insurance check. Now he was behaving as if my sudden wealth affected him personally. I'm still processing this myself, Robert, I said quietly. Of course. It's overwhelming. His smile could have illuminated a small town. But this is fantastic for the children too. I mean, with your resources combined with mine, we can truly ensure Sophia and Ben have everything they require. Combined. There it was. He was already scheming how to access my inheritance. Wealth doesn't change people, it reveals who they were all along. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. Mrs. McCarthy, there are documents requiring your signature, and we should schedule an appointment to review the various accounts and properties you've inherited. It's quite complex. Properties? I asked. Clara owned a beach house in California, a downtown Portland condominium, and 4 rental properties in Seattle. Additionally, there's the stock portfolio, several certificates of deposit, and a money market account. You'll want to consult a financial advisor to develop a management strategy. Robert was practically vibrating with excitement. Helen, you should come home with us tonight. We need to celebrate as a family, and there's so much to discuss. The children will be thrilled to see you. 8 months ago, I might have believed him. 8 months ago, I might have thought the money had suddenly made me worthy of love again. But surviving on simple meals and silence teaches you to recognize hungry predators even when they wear sheep's clothing. That's very generous, Robert, but I think I need time to absorb this development. Nonsense, he said, standing and extending his hand as if expecting me to take it. Your family, this is precisely the kind of news that reunites families. I remained seated. Funny how money accomplishes that. His smile flickered momentarily. What do you mean? 8 months ago, I was a depressing reminder who needed removal from your home for the children's emotional well-being. Today, I'm family again. The only alteration is my bank balance. Mr. Davidson observed this exchange with the fascination of someone watching a chess match between a grandmaster and a novice. Robert's face cycled through several emotions before settling on wounded innocence. Helen, I believe you misinterpreted my position then. We were all grieving, making decisions that seemed appropriate at the time but perhaps weren't ideal. I've regretted asking you to leave from the moment you drove away. Have you? I stood, gathering my purse. Because when I called last Thanksgiving to speak with Sophia and Ben, you informed me they were too occupied to come to the phone. When I mailed birthday gifts, they were returned unopened. When I appeared at Ben's soccer match 4 months ago, you told security I was harassing your family. Each fact I recited tightened his expression. He'd likely forgotten half these incidents, dismissing them as easily as he'd dismissed me. There were misunderstandings, he said weakly. No, Robert, there was cruelty. Deliberate, calculated cruelty designed to erase me from my grandchildren's lives so completely they'd forget I ever mattered to them. Mr. Davidson intervened smoothly. Mrs. McCarthy, shall we schedule your return to handle inheritance paperwork? Perhaps next week when you've had time to process everything. That would be perfect, I said, grateful for the interruption. Thank you for everything, Mr. Davidson. Robert followed me to the elevator, his desperation becoming more evident with each step. Helen, please don't depart angry. Elizabeth wouldn't want this division between us. She'd want us united for the children's benefit. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. You know what Elizabeth wanted, Robert? She wanted her children to know their grandmother loved them. She wanted them to have stability and family connections that would endure their entire lives. Instead, you taught them that love is conditional, that family can be discarded when inconvenient. That's not fair, he protested as the doors began closing. Neither was ejecting a grieving woman with nowhere to go, I replied. But existence has an interesting way of restoring balance. The final image before the elevator doors sealed completely was Robert's face, pale and desperate, as he realized the woman he deemed powerless could now shape his children's futures. I drove to my small apartment in a daze, my mind reeling with numbers that seemed unreal. $2.6 million. Enough money to purchase dignity, security, choices. Enough money to make Robert Henderson profoundly regret underestimating Helen McCarthy. But first, I needed to determine what kind of woman I wanted to become with this power. Because Aunt Clara was correct about one thing. The cosmos did possess a sense of justice. The question was what I intended to do with it. My phone began ringing at 6 the next morning. I ignored it. Then it rang again at 6:15, 6:30, and 6:45. When it rang for the fifth time at 7, I was awake anyway, so I answered without checking the display. Grandma Helen. Sophia's voice was tentative, smaller than I remembered. Dad said, he said you inherited some money. My heart simultaneously broke and soared. After 8 months of silence, my granddaughter was calling me, even if it concerned money. Hello, sweetheart, I said, sitting up in bed. Yes, my great-aunt Clara left me quite a surprise. How are you? How's school? I'm fine. Dad wants to know if you could come for dinner tonight. He said we need to talk as a family about your situation. My situation. Robert was already coaching her how to approach me. Probably filling her mind with ideas about how wonderful it would be if Grandma returned home now that she could contribute financially. I'd love to see you, Sophia, but I'm uncertain about dinner. Your father and I have matters we need to resolve first. He said you were upset about some misunderstanding from before, but that families should forgive each other. Her voice had that rehearsed quality indicating she was repeating Robert's words verbatim. What do you think about that? I asked carefully. There was a lengthy pause. I looked for you at my birthday party, she said finally, so quietly I almost missed it. Dad said you were too busy to come. I closed my eyes, fury and sorrow roaring through me. Robert had told me Sophia didn't want to see me. He'd told Sophia I was too busy to see her. The lies flowed both directions, engineered to separate us and sever our bond. I wanted to be there more than anything, I said. I wasn't too busy. I wasn't invited. Oh. Another long pause. Dad says you might help pay for my college now. And there it was. Robert had already begun his campaign, ensuring the children understood my value was tied to my ability to finance their futures. It was manipulative and disgusting but also revealing. He was frightened enough to show his hand this early, meaning he recognized his vulnerable position. Sophia, could you do something for me? Could you tell your father I'll consider having dinner with the family, but only if he and I speak privately first? Just the two of us. Okay. He's going to ask what you want to discuss. Tell him I want to talk about the past 8 months. All of it. And Sophia, I love you and your brother more than you'll ever know. That hasn't changed, regardless of what anyone has told you. Her voice was thick with emotion when she responded, I love you too, Grandma. After she hung up, I sat in my tiny kitchen drinking coffee and planning my strategy. Because make no mistake, this was now warfare. Robert had used my grandchildren as weapons against me, transforming them into unwitting soldiers in his campaign to erase my presence from their lives. But now I possessed resources he desperately needed, and it was time to negotiate from strength. My phone rang again at 10. Robert this time, his voice carefully controlled. "Helen, Sophia mentioned you want to talk privately before coming to dinner." "Of course, I think that's wise. We have much to discuss." "Yes, we do, but not at your house. Meet me at Antonio's restaurant on Central Avenue at noon. We'll talk there." I selected Antonio's deliberately. It was public enough that Robert couldn't completely lose his temper, but intimate enough for serious conversation. More importantly, it was where he'd taken Elizabeth on their 5th anniversary 12 years earlier. If he retained any residual conscience about how he'd treated his wife's mother, perhaps the location would remind him. I arrived first and chose a corner table where we could speak privately. Robert entered 5 minutes later, and I suppressed a smile at his appearance. He'd dressed for this lunch, wearing his best suit, and a tie that screamed, trustworthy family man. He'd even gotten a haircut since yesterday. "You look wonderful, Helen," he said, leaning to kiss my cheek as if we were beloved relatives reuniting. "I'm so pleased we're doing this." I let him order wine and make small talk about the weather until our meals arrived. Then I set down my fork and looked him directly in the eye. "Tell me about the life insurance money, Robert." He nearly choked on his food. "What about it? You seemed surprised Elizabeth had changed the beneficiary to the children. When did you last review her policy?" His Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "I don't recall exactly. We didn't discuss financial details much during her illness." "That's interesting because according to the insurance company, you contacted them 5 times in the month before Elizabeth died inquiring about claim procedures and payout timelines." The blood drained from his face. "How do you know that?" "I called them yesterday. Beneficiaries can access certain information, and since the money is going to Sophia and Ben, they were quite helpful." This was a complete fabrication. I had no access to insurance records. But Robert didn't know that, and his reaction revealed everything I needed to know. "I was merely planning ahead," he said weakly. "I knew there would be expenses after Elizabeth passed." "Expenses like what?" "You maintained our daughter's medical insurance until the end. The house is paid off thanks to my money. What expenses were so urgent you needed to inquire about life insurance payouts while your wife was still alive?" He stared at his plate, likely running calculations in his head about how much trouble he faced. "I made some financial errors. I thought the insurance money would help me rectify them." "What kind of errors?" The silence stretched between us. Finally, he looked up with the expression of a man backed into a corner with no escape. "I borrowed against Elizabeth's retirement account without informing her. When she became ill and couldn't work, I couldn't make the repayments. I thought the life insurance would cover it." My stomach turned. While Elizabeth fought for her life, worried about medical bills and her children's futures, Robert had been stealing from her retirement fund. Money she'd saved for decades vanished to cover his financial mistakes. "How much did you take?" $65,000. I set down my water glass carefully, afraid I might throw it otherwise. "What did you spend $65,000 on?" "Some investments that failed. A business opportunity that collapsed. Look, it wasn't supposed to be permanent. I intended to repay it with money from your wife's life insurance policy." "I never wanted Elizabeth to die," he said quickly. "You must believe that. But when it became clear she wouldn't recover, I had to think practically about the future." "Practically?" "While I slept on a cot beside my daughter's hospital bed, while I sold my home to pay for experimental treatments, while I watched my beloved child waste away, Robert was thinking practically about how much money her death would bring him." "And then you discovered the insurance was going to the children instead." He nodded miserably. "Elizabeth must have suspected something. She never said anything to me, but she must have known." Of course Elizabeth had known. My brilliant, intuitive daughter had discerned what kind of man she'd married and protected her children's inheritance from him. Even dying, she'd remained steps ahead of her husband's greed. "So when you asked me to leave the house," I said slowly, "it wasn't because my presence hindered your grieving process. It was because you needed to sell the house to cover the money you'd stolen from Elizabeth's retirement account." "Partly, yes. And you cut me off from Sophia and Ben because you feared I'd discover what you'd done." "I was trying to protect them from family drama while they grieved their mother." You were protecting yourself. I leaned forward. Tell me, Robert, what happens when the retirement account company realizes the money is missing? When they start asking questions about unauthorized withdrawals. His face went white. I'll repay it. With what money? You just told me your investments failed and your business opportunity collapsed. The house sale might cover it, but then what? How do you support your children? He stared at me across the table. And I saw the exact moment he realized why I'd wanted this private conversation. This wasn't merely about the past 8 months. This was about the future. His future. His children's future, all of it suddenly dependent on the goodwill of the woman he'd discarded as worthless. I'll figure it out, he said finally. Will you? I reached into my purse and extracted a manila envelope. These are public record printouts. Your mortgage payments have been late 5 times in the past 8 months. You've maxed out for credit cards. Your vehicle payment is overdue. You're not figuring anything out, Robert. You're drowning. I stood and put on my coat. Dinner with my grandchildren tonight sounds lovely. Collect me at 6. And Robert, we're going to discuss new family arrangements because circumstances are about to change dramatically. I left him sitting at the table staring at evidence of his financial collapse. Finally understanding that the elderly woman he'd discarded now held his entire future in her hands. This evening Robert collected me precisely at 6, driving Elizabeth's car because his SUV was apparently experiencing transmission problems he couldn't afford to repair. He'd changed into casual clothes, abandoning the business suit for something more appropriate for family dinner. His smile was strained and his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The children are genuinely excited to see you, he said as we pulled into his driveway. I explained there had been some miscommunication between us, and we're resolving things now. Miscommunication. That was what he called 8 months of deliberate cruelty and isolation. How much have you told them about your financial situation? I asked. His jaw tightened. I didn't want to worry them with adult problems. So they don't know you've been taking money from their mother's retirement account. Could you please not phrase it that way? He snapped, then immediately softened his tone. Look, I made mistakes, but I'm addressing them. Tonight should focus on family, on progressing together. The house appeared unchanged externally, but crossing the threshold felt like entering a museum exhibit titled Life Before Everything Shattered. Elizabeth's photographs remained on the mantel. Her favorite mug sat in the kitchen sink. Her reading glasses were folded on the end table beside her preferred chair. Robert had preserved everything like a shrine, which might have seemed touching if I didn't know he was probably too financially strapped to redecorate. Sophia emerged from the kitchen, taller than I remembered, her blonde hair pulled back in Elizabeth's characteristic ponytail. She hesitated momentarily, then embraced me in a hug that felt like homecoming. I missed you so much, Grandma, she whispered. I missed you too, sweetheart. More than you know. Ben wandered in from the family room, 14 now, all arms and legs like a young deer. He'd grown at least 4 inches since I'd last seen him, but his smile retained the same shy sweetness that had melted my heart since toddlerhood. Hey, Grandma Helen, he said, accepting my hug with the awkward grace of a teenager who still loved his grandmother but wasn't certain how to demonstrate it. How's basketball season progressing? I asked. Pretty good. I made junior varsity this year. Junior varsity. That's fantastic. His face brightened with pride. Coach says I might start if I keep improving. Robert bustled around the kitchen, retrieving plates from cabinets and talking incessantly about how wonderful it was to have the family reunited. But I observed my grandchildren carefully, and what I saw broke my heart. They were tiptoeing around their father, quick to agree with everything he said, careful not to make noise or mess. The warm, chaotic energy that had filled this home when Elizabeth lived had been replaced by the tense quiet of children afraid to upset an unstable adult. During dinner, Robert launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech about family values, forgiveness, and second chances. The children listened politely, but Sophia kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. So, Robert said finally, setting down his fork with dramatic emphasis. I've been considering Grandma Helen's new circumstances, and I believe they present wonderful opportunities for all of us. What kind of opportunities? Sophia asked carefully. Well, with Grandma's inheritance, we could properly plan for your futures. College funds, perhaps a family vacation to help us heal from losing mom, some home improvements. I watched him spin his web, transforming my inheritance into a family asset he obviously intended to help manage. Sophia and Ben looked at me expectantly, and I recognized this was my moment to either participate in Robert's fantasy or shatter it completely. Actually, I said, I wanted to discuss some changes that will occur. Robert's smile faltered. Changes? Sophia, Ben, do you remember when I lived here before your mom died? How we baked together, worked on homework, watched movies on Friday nights. They both nodded, their faces brightening at the memory. I want you to know I didn't choose to leave. I was asked to leave, and I've waited all these months for an opportunity to be part of your lives again. Robert cleared his throat loudly. Helen, I think we agreed to move forward, not revisit old misunderstandings. These weren't misunderstandings, Robert, and the children deserve truth. I turned back to Sophia and Ben. Your father told me you didn't want to see me anymore. He told you I was too busy to see you. Neither was true. Sophia's face became very still. What do you mean? I mean I've been calling, texting, and mailing presents that were returned. I've attended your school events only to be informed I was unwelcome. I've been living in a small apartment above a store, missing you daily, and wondering why you'd stopped loving me. We never stopped loving you, Ben said quietly. Dad said you needed space to grieve, and that you'd contact us when you were ready. The ensuing silence was profound. I could see pieces connecting in Sophia's mind. The intelligent girl who'd inherited her mother's sharp intuition finally comprehending how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. So she said slowly, when I asked why Grandma didn't attend my birthday party, and you said she was occupied, she was standing outside the fence at your basketball game 4 months ago, I said gently. But your father told security I was bothering the family. Sophia's face crumpled. Dad, is that true? Robert was trapped, and he knew it. He could lie, but Sophia was now old enough to verify his stories. He could tell the truth, but that would expose him as the manipulator he'd become. He selected a middle path that satisfied no one. I was attempting to protect you from adult complications, he said. Your grandmother and I had disagreements about what benefited the family. I thought it would be easier if we resolved them privately by separating me from my grandchildren for 8 months. I asked. By making them believe I'd abandoned them. That wasn't my intention. Sophia stood abruptly. I need air, she said and walked onto the back patio. Ben followed her, leaving Robert and me alone in the kitchen, surrounded by remnants of a family dinner that had disintegrated faster than either anticipated. You didn't need to do that, Robert said quietly. Yes, I did. Those children have lived with falsehoods for months. They deserve to know why their grandmother vanished from their lives, and what happens now. You have the money. You have the moral high ground. You've turned my children against me. What's your objective here? I looked around the kitchen where I'd helped Elizabeth learn to cook, where I'd bandaged scraped knees, and listened to homework complaints, and watched my grandchildren grow. This house contained my life's best memories. But it also held the worst 8 months. My objective, I said, is ensuring Sophia and Ben have the stability and security their mother desired for them, with or without you. His face paled. What does that mean? Through the window, I could see my grandchildren sitting on patio steps, conversing in low voices, likely processing the truth about their father's deception and my disappearance. It means, I said, that we need a very different conversation about the future. Because the old Robert, who could discard inconvenient family members, no longer exists. The new Robert must demonstrate he deserves inclusion in his children's lives. I left him sitting at the kitchen table, and went outside to speak with Sophia and Ben because whatever occurred next, they would participate in decision-making. They'd been manipulated and deceived long enough. It was time they learned how real power felt. Now I'm curious about your experiences. Have you ever faced family betrayal? Have you discovered your strength through being tested? Share your story in the comments, your voice might help others. If this account resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to Winds of Thought for more genuine stories of courage and transformation.